Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back to the second part of today's event. Today's event, Digital Power and Its Undoing, Resisting Algorithmic Domination and Reclaiming Tech Futures. It's my pleasure just to pass the microphone over to kind of give us some more context on what's happening for the next part to the coordinator of the Algorithmic Technology and Society Working Group, and also PhD candidate in the ND program here at Concordia, Martin Deron. Martin, welcome in.
Thank you. Is this on? Yes, wonderful. Thanks so much for being back on time and having taken your snacks and bathroom breaks very quickly. We'll try to get started very promptly. So obviously we've talked about different harms in the first part of the discussion, and we touched upon a little bit of issues related to sustainability. And I'd like to sort of build on this to introduce our second panel. As one of the many doors in which we could take it from. So obviously for all these AI, digital technology, algorithmic technology systems to work, there's an important need for machinery, for infrastructure that we sometimes tend to forget, for equipments, devices, cables, servers, etc. And all that machinery, all those infrastructure require vast amounts of precious resources, of water, energy. We estimate that the ICT as a sector is roughly responsible for between 3 and 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, more than 10% of the global electricity consumption, and generates around 60 million metric tons of e-waste annually, and all those figures are going up. But in addition to all those direct effects or direct environmental impacts, digital and algorithmic technologies also operate within a broader socioeconomic context, which we've seen, right? Which is in itself, which brings in itself a lot of unsustainable trajectories. So as we integrate AI into all economic activities, we end up also reinforcing activities that are closely linked to the ongoing climate crisis, such as fossil fuel extraction also, but obviously, but also high trading finance or targeted advertising, for example. As always, this conversation of sustainability is largely being hijacked by large economic actors and institutions in ways that make it look like actions are being taken, but that do not necessarily challenge the unsustainability that is at the root of such trajectories, right? So we hear often about frameworks such as responsible ICT, responsible AI, green transition, and those are becoming increasingly popular, but they don't necessarily question the continued expansion of the digital world into every facet of our lives. So as it stands, we have to recognize, I think, that the digital world is a vast contributor to the socio and ecological crises. And if we want to help build more sustainable and equitable societies, we need to imagine radically alternative technological futures. And that's why we're here today. So in order to explore some of those alternative technological futures that are rooted in different value sets, such as justice, sustainability, commonization, plural ways of knowing, we'll get to hear from 3 wonderful speakers that I'll attempt to introduce briefly, but you're more than welcome to expand as you speak next. So in my right, I have Sandrine Lambert, who is a postdoctoral fellow in the Sociology and Anthropology department, as well as the Milieu Institute for Arts, Culture, and Technology here at Concordia. Sandrine holds a PhD in anthropology from Laval University in Quebec City. Her research focuses on the relationship between democracy and technology, and more specifically on issues of citizen participation in places dedicated to digital fabrication. So maker spaces, fab labs, and there might be other types that I'm not familiar with. Thank you so much, Sandrine, for being here. We have today as well Vijay Kolinjivadi, who is an assistant professor in sustainable and equitable economies at the School for Community and Public Affairs here at Concordia as well. Vijay has been an important critical figure in the field of ecological economics, frequently calling out extractive and colonial practices disguised as green growth or other claims of sustainability that don't question broader economic paradigms. This part is from me. I hope you're okay with it. He's a co-editor of the website Uneven Earth and a co-author of the book The Sustainability Class, How to Take Back Our Future from Lifestyle Environmentalists, published by the New Press in 2024, and I believe you brought a copy for those of you who are interested. Thank you so much for being here. And we have Christoph Becker online with us. Christoph, I hope you can hear us well. We can see you perfectly. So Christoph is a full professor at the Faculty of Information and the School of the Environment at the University of Toronto, where he also leads the Just Sustainability Design Lab. His book, Insolvent, How to Reorient Computing for Just Sustainability, published by MIT Press in 2023, has been endorsed by leading scholars in computing science and in philosophy and labeled compulsory reading for engineers, designers, and everyone interested in thinking about technology. Last but not least, Christoph also has the great pleasure of being my instructor this semester. Thank you so much, Christoph, for being here. I'm very thrilled to have you three around this panel. So maybe we can start. I feel like it'd be a good transition from the previous discussion. Right, so I mentioned obviously the direct, the indirect environmental effects of digital technologies, but there are also a lot of things that sort of that fall in between, right? For example, there are a lot of imaginaries, ideologies that are spread through the design, the deployment of digital and algorithmic technologies. We talked about a few of them. Jonathan talked about a few of them, such as accelerationism. You're right, it's a hard word. Those cultural elements are much harder to grasp, to identify, and to quantify, but they do play an important role in shaping how we engage, how we resist, and how we accept digital technologies, and ultimately how much they affect the world around us. Vijay, I'd like to start with you. You've done some work on long-termism, which is one of those big ideologies that are currently dominant in the tech that we have around us. Is there a way to sort of identify what the environmental impacts of such an ideology as long-termism? How can we go about quantifying those environmental impacts, and how does it impact the ongoing climate crisis?
Hello. Am I on? Oh yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Martin, and thank you all. It's really a pleasure to be here. And firstly, I should mention I am just coming out of a cold, so my voice is a bit not great. So just bear with me with that. I maybe want to start a little bit. One of the things that we write about in the book, The Sustainability Class, is about greenwash. We have written, what the sustainability class thrives on: false solutions that are constantly being cycled, and that the failures of those solutions get recycled into new failures, and it continues ad nauseum. So one of the consequences of repeated greenwash over the last decade plus is increasingly this threat of green lash, where there's a backlash against environmentalism because it continuously produces failed responses, which is, very much central to a very liberal-oriented solutions base, which is that, fundamentally, structurally, we're not going to change anything, but we are going to provide, we're going to make it seem as though we are making improvements or efforts. And so this people are beginning to see this kind of disconnect, this out of touch, green solutionism with environmentalism as a whole. And this could not come at a more serious moment for this kind of thing to happen, where we are. 2024 was the warmest year on record, and already January 2025 has surpassed the previous year's record. So it is very, very serious to have this kind of thing happening. And I will make a mention about as well at some point some of the things that we touched in the last panel, just about how the current moment is creating a sort of speculative disasterism in a way, where new ways for capital to land in new strategies around militarism and nationalism that perpetuate, that ignore, that actually take advantage of the climate crisis to reinforce it and entrench it. But what I want to focus here, and in response to this question, is about long-termism. So Jonathan, you talked about accelerationism. Long-termism is the reason why it's so important to reflect on it is because it is being confused with sustainability, or the possibility that it could get confused with sustainability, and that is a very dangerous prospect, to say the least. So basically, the idea is, and I want to raise this because here in the university where we are sitting in Concordia, you see, this move towards, embracing or understanding of sustainability, making a transition to sustainability at the same time as, the university is also embracing generative AI technology and, this sort of wave of this inability, in fact, to see the contradictions between, pushing for sustainability and at the same time supporting AI. So I want to actually read a small passage of something that I have been working on and maybe can help to answer this question. I don't actually have the answers. It's something that we have to reflect upon deliberatively, I guess, collectively. So a significant part of the environmental problem is exactly how the problem is defined and by whom. There is a fatal confusion between understanding sustainability as maintaining the conditions for life on our planet to flourish in abundance for present and future generations, and the dangerous and speculative notion of long-termism. This is also has been known as effective altruism and is being promoted by philosophers like Nick Bostrom and Ray Kurzweil and others. This latter is sometimes, so it's known as effective altruism, but it has a kind of eugenicist orientation for expanding civilization into the galaxy, into the solar system and beyond, presented as an evolutionary inevitability towards a transhumanist techno-utopia. So it believes that the future of humanity is overwhelmingly positive. This is really important, but only if it manages what are considered, quote, existential risks. So views range from what populist psychologist Steven Pinker believe are, quote, despite what you hear on the news, humanity has been getting better off, to best-selling author Yuval Noah Harari's claim that since humans are better at processing data than chickens, surely a data processing system that absorbs and processes more data than humans is superior to a human, in the same way that humans are superior to chickens. But the bigger love for long-termists, from Silicon Valley types to those who find themselves at the helm of government, reflects a deeply normalized and evolutionary inevitability about what being human requires. So it draws from this eugenics-leaning desire to genetically refine and remove the inefficiencies that are defined as existential risk. One of these, quote, civilizational suicidal risks is empathy. According to Elon Musk, who very recently in a podcast with Joe Rogan recently said that empathy is, quote, the fundamental weakness of Western civilization, and was leading to an outpouring of care for migrants, presumably with black and brown skin. Yet Musk's desire to save humanity through visions of planetary colonization aligns with a long-termist view that collateral damage to people and the planet must not only be accepted, but openly embraced. So poverty, a struggling working class, wars of territorial conquest, planetary climate breakdown are ultimately seen as tiny blips or sacrifices justifiable to advance this grand arc of humanity's, capital H humanity's, potential. But what happens when the vast majority of living, breathing human beings who may not have pale skin and blue eyes are viewed as an existential risk? So whether you're talking about making America great again, whatever country you want to call, now in Canada we have the same version, there is a moral connotation in pursuing technological supremacy and this kind of Napoleonic expansionism as necessary to subdue what are these existential risks, such as respect for human rights, poverty alleviation, anything that will detract focus from this capital H human potential. As Emil Torres writes, and they have written quite substantially on long-termism, quote, every problem arises from too little rather than too much technology. So we actually, basically the argument with long-termism is that we have to think in a way at the coming greatness of humanity. We should not be worried about the environmental collapse. because there are bigger things that we can see in the future. There is planets we can colonize. There are places we can take humanity, and those humans will survive. It doesn't matter about the humans that don't survive on this planet. So we have to understand this logic as climate policy. It is not separate from climate policy. It is a climate orientation. It is an orientation of how they are understanding sustainability, how they understand what that means. And as long as we remain disconnected from that reflection of sustainability, we are falling directly into the path of long-termism. So what I want to say here is, and I think there was a comment before about how Sophie had mentioned a comment about how there was always this kind of techno-fascism in the background. We see that with economic policy, so with cost-benefit analysis. We always, we reduce all benefits and all costs to monetary terms. This is what mainstream economists do. From a long-termist perspective to this, basically they are doing essentially, they're subjecting a standard economic cost-benefit analysis to a self-absorbed cosmic timescale, where future monetary value of an intergalactic transhumanist human race could compensate for all the losses and still come out on the top. That is precisely how our economic system operates. That's how we make decisions based on this kind of cost-benefit analysis. And part of this is relating to, what are considered, so what we see right now with gutting of the environmental impact, the Environmental Protection Agency in the US, gutting of environmental policies, deciding to expand pipelines because of geopolitical interests, etc. All these things are also framed, in terms of efficiency, in terms of that long-termist efficiency. So it's like, why expend more emotional, economic, or political energy to quell one's conscience? This is considered actually morally a misplaced endeavor. So this is what Torres, citing long-termist philosopher Nick Bostrom, calls, quote, feel-good projects of suboptimal efficiency. So I just want to end just to say that, long-termists are less likely to be saddled with democracy, with an international rules-based order, if these are viewed as barriers to this kind of future of post-humanist self-realization. So the same kind of logics we see unfolding with Russia's territorial expansion in the face of NATO, Israel's macabre 2025 vision for utopian Gaza, space colonizing visions of the MAGA movement. Common to all these is this paranoid understanding of threat. And it's used to justify untold crimes against humanity, but for the sake of this bigger civilizational project. This is a bipartisan kind of support. We see that long-termism has accrued tens of billions of dollars under interests of both liberal and conservative governments alike. So it's not just a fringe kind of thing. Progressive or liberal political center politics from the UK to the EU to Canada and the US, they have thrived on this kind of utilitarian profit maximization of cost-benefit logics for the last 40 years of neoliberal policy. So the silence that we see is not surprising. We don't see any action in this regard. So I just wanted to, I'm going to end here just to say that the distinction between sustainability and long-termism with respects to things like AI is something that we may be missing the mark on, and we need to pay much more closer attention to.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we can move on to Sandrine. So on different topics, but maybe on more positive fronts, because
I will try.
Because what?
I will try.
You will try, for sure. Well, just drawing from your work, right, during your PhD, you spent a year and a half, actually, doing field work in several digital fabrication spaces in Barcelona. Not a terrible place to do field work, where you worked more specifically on the political potential of citizen participation. Can you tell us a bit more about those spaces for maybe those of us who are less familiar with them? For example, who participates in those places? Who doesn't necessarily participate in those spaces? To what extent do they reproduce or do they challenge the dominant, broader socio-technical imaginaries that we've started to talk about?
Yes, thank you very much, Martin, and thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be here as well, to be part of this panel. Yes, it's very interesting as we will change the scale and the place of everything that we have talked, because it was very United States centered till now. So let's travel to Barcelona just a little bit and to see if we can restore a bit of hope, let's say. So yes, it's true. As a part of my doctoral research in anthropology, I did a research fieldwork in Barcelona in a difficult period because it was from September 20 to February 22. But to give a bit of context, my main research interest is to reflect on the relationships between democracy and technology. And for me, digital fabrication spaces, or we can say maker spaces, or Fab Lab, represented kind of privileged places of observation in order to study the social and political relationships that can be played out at this micro-social scale. And my main aim was to study the socio-political potential, or potentialities, let's say plural, of citizen participation in maker spaces. Is the relation to technology different in this type of places? If so, how? What are the effects? And what can we learn about it for other scale, maybe? So as an anthropologist, I use empirical material, so it means that fieldwork was my main inspiration and material to develop an analyze about that. I did participant observation, which means I trained in electronics, welding, laser cutting, and stuff like that. I think I was the perfect person to know if this type of space can change me as a manual person, because I was not very skilled at the beginning in that. So I visited more than 20 makerspaces in Barcelona, and I released more than 50 interviews. So why did I think these places were appropriate for this kind of analysis? After all, Fab Labs are the product of MIT. This is a place of, it's where it's born. And makerspaces or maker agriculture as a product of California, both centers of technocracy. So I was initially intrigued by the fact that the network of these spaces or places, mainly Fab Labs, also had a social project that could be embodied in the Fab City, which was presented as an alternative of a smart city. So what does a digital fabrication space look like? It was a question. So they can take a variety of forms and obey to a variety of management or governance modes. Let's say they are somewhere between a community center and a collaborative workshop. They are characterized by the presence of digitally controlled machines, the best known, which is a 3D printer, for example. They often feature vinyl cutters, Arduino microcontrollers, digital embroidery machine. Most of the time with the free software, with the use of free software, which is very central or important in this culture, if there is a culture. But yeah, they often have a showcase of objects produced in the workshops, and in the areas open to the public, there is often an animator and a technician. Classes are given in all fields for all ages, so repair, manufacturing, or knowledge sharing are often emphasized, and I will speak after that about knowledge sharing, which is a very important point. And at the same time, groups organize themselves around common projects in free workshops. So people come here, and mostly they live in the neighborhood. So we can talk about makerspace, the proximity makerspace. Other places could be self-managed, and members can come in at any time for personal projects. We could say it's rather male-dominated milieu, but I did meet a number of women either in groups dedicated to electronics or digital fabrication for women, but also as technicians or animators and coordinators. The city of Barcelona is very proud of its network of municipal makerspaces, which are called Ateneus de Fabricació Digital. Originally, they were supposed to be MIT Fab Labs that wanted to establish themselves in Europe. I think it was in 2011. And in the end, it's quite funny because almost no one remembers the story, but it was an architect of the city of Barcelona, which was in relation with Center of Bit and Atoms. And the plan was to spread Fab Labs in the neighborhood in Barcelona. And even the future mayor organized a kind of a press meeting saying that in a very poor neighborhood, saying that in this place people have the rights to have MIT Fab Labs. And there were a lot of protests against that from people saying, no, but what we need is only to eat. We need stuff to eat. We don't need machines. We don't need technology. And the principal responsible of MIT Fab Labs, Neil Gershenfeld, it was a founder. He's called the guru, even in the Fab Lab Summit. And come to Barcelona to the inauguration after all the protests and discussion, and told to people that if your need is to eat, you just don't you haven't understood what the machines are capable of to do, because we can print food as well, so there is no problem at all. And so it's an example of techno-solutionism and techno-utopianism. It's very close to this idea to have a planet B to, we can, okay, this is the same idea. And so this is a fun story that, fun or not fun, but this is a story that few people remember in Barcelona. It was not so long, but yeah. This is it. And finally, the municipality has decided to change a bit the project, deciding that we could have some spaces with English as a main language. It will not be open to the public. And as well, it has to be free. So they changed the name in Ateneus de Fabricació Digital. And it's interesting because Ateneus has a long story in the anarchist story. It was a place, it's Ateneus, the place where we can gather and we can deliver a kind of popular education for people that has not this opportunity, for example. So it was a way to Catalanize, maybe something coming from MIT. So yes, I was not supposed to tell this story, but I think it's very fundamental to think about the cross of imaginaries as well. And what more about this? So yes, now digital makerspaces try to blend in the local landscape and to respond to citizens' needs in a variety of ways. So they are more in the tradition of popular education, and some of the older makers, the person who makes, were delighted to tell me that what they had learned in all the process of implementation of makerspaces and going to these makerspaces was that everything they had always done in the past. For example, tinkering with radios or fixing things or making things in electronics and so on, had now a name. So it's called I'm a maker. So they told me I've done the same things, but now I'm a maker, which is much more cool. It's not being a nerd, it's the maker. So there is a positive meaning around that and another culture more contemporary. And this term of maker appeared at the beginning of 2000 year, presenting itself as a disruptive culture focused on innovation. But in reality, for example, women who use to sew together, or radio fans, or electronics enthusiasts, and early video game enthusiasts know that none of this is new, and that is a vocabulary of disruption that is common to use. But yeah, they know that being makers, it's a cooler word for their passions. But more seriously, I've made the bet or hypothesis that a lot of information we can learn in makerspace could be useful at other scales. And I'm also intervening in some of conferences or radio or lots of places to reflect on artificial intelligence, but I like to remain that it's also a digital technology. So that's why I'm thinking about social and political impacts of digital technology. And it was very interesting for me to take this little area of makerspaces in Barcelona, where there is a very long story about history about direct democracy, participation, and stuff like that. So it was an interesting mix.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Sandrine, for bringing all that back to us. Maybe you can. I know I have a few questions for each one of you, but just, I'll switch to Christoph, if that's okay. Those and the examples that you give actually just sort of bring back on the table the idea that all technology projects are deeply political, right? They embody different visions. And
I have some things to add.
If you want to keep on going, absolutely. Yeah. Well, then you're more than welcome to, or I can come back to you after.
Perfect.
It's up to you.
Let's do this.
Yeah, I'll come back to you. Okay. Because I think it also speaks, and what you just said about bringing all the information that you've learned to different spheres. I think it speaks a lot with the current discussions that are also happening within the computing research field that are perhaps not so dominant. Maybe Christoph, you can tell us a bit more about that. But I'd like for you to speak more on those reflections that are happening within the computing research field about how. Should we redirect the field altogether? How can we use the computing research field to perhaps move away from the growth-oriented capitalist orientation that is so intertwined with currently and maybe help shape different worlds? Is there a way to redirect computing in short?
Thank you. Really interesting starts as well from the other panelists. Really interesting to hear that. So this question, can we imagine a way forward where computing no longer supports the expansion of capitalist practices, is a huge question. And so my response is definitely very incomplete. I'll try to stick to this forward-looking prompt rather than how bad things are. And so I don't want to dwell too much on the destructive side that we're hearing about, but maybe mention that inside of computing discourses, the recognition of the destructive role of computing is still so uncomfortable that many times when we want to bring things up, we have to soften them by acknowledging that computing is also having potential to help with environmental challenges, for example. And of course, the trouble is that the limited evidence for that potential is then blown out of proportion with wishful thinking and fantastical projections, often to soothe the conscience and kind of keep computing going in a direction that it already is in. And that reactionary stance is, of course, one of the greenwashing mechanisms of capture by which infrastructures of exploitation ensure their continued functioning. So inside of computing, in many places, we're always facing a distorted conversation. And I found it crucial to help carve out some more safe spaces for that kind of conversation. Myself as well. But computing is not a monolith. A lot of contradictory things take place in parallel. And so I think it's worth remembering that throughout the history of computing, there have been critical voices, organized resistance, and alternative perspectives. So can we imagine a way forward where computing no longer supports this expansion of capitalist practices? Yes, I think yes, we can. Some always have. Many are working on it. Please join us. I think we need all the help to redirect these possible futures of computing and to envision technologies otherwise in the service of collective and sustainable human and non-human well-being. And I think fully recognizing the mess we're in now is a crucial step to ensure that we're realistic and to envision and walk into new directions. We want a computing that recognizes its history, that recognizes it is never neutral, never innocent, that refuses to serve fascism, a computing that is ecologically responsible, that prioritizes communities over corporations or humans over capital. And that act of envisioning needs to evaluate the role and responsibilities of many different layers of computing practice, education, research, organization, so-called innovation. But it is very possible to think and do computing otherwise. And non-capitalist computing, in a sense, has always been happening. Not every algorithm, even system or device that we have now is wholly, entirely capitalist today, one could say, even if it operates within a society in which that capitalism seems omnipresent and inevitable. And so the obvious examples of open tech like Wikipedia or Linux or open hardware are all around us. But openness alone is not sufficient, and open source is also more complex than it often seems. But there is a spectrum of influence and entanglement already today between computing and capitalism. And so I think maybe one of the ways to think about the question is that it's a question of releasing more of computing from capitalism. And so I think to do that, we have to dig deep and work together with existing communities and with movements for social change like degrowth. And that shows us a vision of technology beyond capitalism that is in many places rough and high level and sometimes sounds a bit abstract, but it does have key features, and there exist projects that illustrate these already beautifully. It is convivial technology that amplifies, not diminishes human autonomy and community. It is ecologically responsible tech that respects planetary boundaries, and it is repairable, maintainable, modifiable tech that prioritizes care and commons and conviviality over convenience and commodification. And so one way maybe to think about it, as I've been proposing a few times, is how that we might have a world in which we call high-tech technology that has proven itself to be ecologically useful and relatively harmless, that has evolved and simplified over time, so it's benign, widely accessible, indispensable, things like bicycles and heat pumps and trains, and maybe some types of open source software and similar things. And low tech is a term we use for newly emerging tech that hasn't been proven to be ecologically or useful or benign, tech that is volatile, possibly toxic, possibly just fake. You can probably think of which types of tech I'm thinking of. And I want to emphasize that this is not a technophobe position. This does not have to be a simplistic vision of no tech. I also don't think this is really a vision of tech sobriety. That's too simplistic. The direction has to be to envision technologies otherwise. And I've been, in some sense, maybe fortunate to be able to direct some of my research and my teaching into these paths. And so, for example, I teach a graduate class called Information Technology Beyond Capitalism, a very exploratory class in which we cover topics like data colonialism, but also donut economics, post-growth, degrowth, innovation without growth, conviviality, worker-owned tech co-ops. And I think we'll talk more about these angles soon. And I sense that many people are very aware of the destructive role of capitalist practices and keen on charting these alternative paths, even if they are in a professional degree program structured very much by capitalism. But it really does seem easier sometimes today to envision societal collapse and fascist dystopia than it is to really see in concrete, tangible ways a future in which we turn things around and in which computing no longer supports that expansion of capitalist practices. It's hard. And so we need help practicing that imagination, and help definitely comes from fields outside of computing. And so we need to build what I call in my book, critical friendships with other fields. And for me, one of the most important of these fields and movements is ecological economics, post-growth, and in particular degrowth, because it offers the clearest, most compelling theory and mountains of evidence, not only why the current trajectory is so terrible ecologically and socially, but also a bit of a roadmap for the structural changes and very reasonable arguments about some of their likely implications, and support for the importance of pluriversal alternatives. so degrowth focuses not so much on shrinking our economies to become smaller versions of capitalism. It is really about a coordinated, equitable, redistributive downscaling of material activity in favor of social and ecological well-being. And there are really two consequences, and I think it's important to understand the relationship between those two consequences. One is that there is, in effect, a reduction of material activity and production and consumption and stuff, and the lowering of the numbers by which we measure things of this type, like GDP. But at the same time, there's a reorganizing of how the economic system works so that a constant increase in GDP is no longer a necessary part of it, so that a reduction in GDP does not have the same social consequences that it does when a capitalist economy hits a recession. And so it's sometimes framed as a release from the growth addiction. And I think that is very helpful because computing is also addicted to growth in many ways. And we can trace this in many different domains in computing, especially in AI, of course. And so some of the redirection steps that I've been working on, or I'm working on, is we need to re-articulate what innovation means without growth and show the consequences of that in computing. We need to articulate how that reorientation changes what we consider good tech. And partially we have to do that so that the more technical specialties within computing can begin doing what they actually do very well, which is to work inventively towards given constraints and specifications. And so understanding how this type of different technology is differently good sets kind of a compass for that. We need to support and celebrate the possibilities that already exist that are outside of capitalist tech. And we need to nurture academic spaces and collaborations kind of beyond academia to grow the tech otherwise community. And partially that is also because most of the really exciting new visions and imaginations do not come from academia or industry, but much rather come from social movements that link individual and collective actions, including refusal and resistance. And so the most exciting efforts of redirection very often don't come from academics like me, but from grassroots efforts, from organizers, from communities or cooperatives, figuring out ways to make and use tech otherwise and kind of carve out safe spaces for innovative thinking inside of a co-op, for example, shielding the workers in the co-op from some of the capitalist madness that would otherwise exploit them. So whether that's counter mapping or counter data or mutual aid or peer production, there's a lot of exciting work happening there. And at the same time, I think maybe the last thing to mention is that acts of resistance and refusal, I think, become more important and meaningful today with the rise of fascism. And so at that intersection of feminist thinking and computing, there's some really interesting work on the meaning of refusal and refusal as an act of design as well. Refusing one path also means that other paths become possible. And maybe I'll stop there.
I think I'll go back in this direction then, if you're okay with this, do a little snake around the table. But I think what Christoph mentioned, and there's a lot of things that, you know, where I was picturing digital commons, where I was picturing makerspaces, I feel like it's only natural to go back to you, Sandrine. But when I hear innovation without growth, switching to values of care, you know, developing new projects with adequate tech or low tech, and thinking about tech otherwise. From your experience working in those different spheres, those different fields that are most often away from academia or outside of academia completely, what can you tell us about maybe the potential of such spaces or the practices themselves to foster alternative ways of engaging with digital technology in practice?
Yes, I will try this. Before answering this question directly, I'd like to remind that before Trump and Musk came to power, it wasn't easy to demonstrate the the political links between political and technology. And the big tech companies succeeded in making digital technology inevitable, synonymous with progress, offering technical solutions to numerous social, economic, and political problems. That's why we are still using innovation as a synonymous as well of progress, but maybe we have to think about this. twice. And at the beginning of my research, I had emphasized non-exceptionality of technology and non-essentialization of technology to be able to put technology back into politics. But I mean by politics, this is le politique, to quote Rancière, more than la politique. So if I want to feed this dialogue between democracy and technologies, it's not from the point of view of fake news or manufacture of opinion, but for politicization of technologies from below, from the ground, in a bottom-up perspective. And this is what this study about makerspaces allow me to do it. So I will emphasize on 3 key points. Physicality, materiality, and sociability. There is more to come, but let's start with that. Physicality, it's important, the existence of a physical space to gather and mix people, ideas, machines, and knowledge. It allows sociability, discussion, and interaction. And it was the ground to build more from that. So in the makerspace, as well, materiality is very visible and important. And I think it's another key point to be more conscious about all the infrastructures needed by that we call dematerialization. And it's also an opportunity to open the black box with help of free software, but we need to be skilled to that. And so the materiality of participation and physicality of practices and encounters allow some reflexivity on the social ecological impact, but also another vision of artifacts. For example, to quote sociologists like Jérôme Denis and David Ponty about maintenance, the care of things is also a human bond, an attention to the living and to the common future. And this is what I have seen in some of the spaces. And I conclude this study that in some digital fabrication spaces, the technology could be viewed as commons. And which means in makerspace, we use and produce commons facilitated by free software, but also this is almost knowledge as a commons. There is a shared knowledge, and this is very central in the function of a makerspace. So, and knowledge as a commons allow to think about a shared governance and allow to think about citizen participation and why not about emancipation. And a concept that I frame come from this analysis on makerspaces, which is citizen technology, and inspired, of course, by citizen science, with this idea of contribution, the contributory capability of every citizen, or agency. This is the right word. And this is very different for me than civic technology. Technology is to use more tools to improve democracy. I will say it like that. This is a shortcut to explain it. But this is very different because for me, citizen technology are technologies that bring people together rather than divide them, hurting them, or all the bias about marginalized communities that we have talked in the panel before. And makerspaces allows us to analyze other relationship to technology. I said it, so sociability is more important than machines. This is that every participant told me. And this type of participation could be linked to a kind of experimental democracy in a place related to technology, and it's also a place for political subjectivation. This is the right place to for a critic to emerge about all the practices. So that kind of places are related with popular education in technology. So it's interesting to merge the two things. It's not so it's very useful, and with an emphasis on experiential knowledge. So I'm thinking about John Dewey. And the citizen technology, and what I observe and related about appropriation of means of production and uses and purposes. For example, technologies, the 3D printing or the laser cutter are used to enhance industrial memory and heritage, it's an example, or to enhance the municipal park where the site is located, or to forge links with the neighborhood and the communities. So it's more a reflection on potentiality or possible, and I'm very inspired by interstitial strategies from sociologist Eric Kolinjivadi, and drawing inspiration from the fermenting at the margins to renew imagination and socio-technical practices, and ensuring them beyond magical thinking, verbal inflation, and to overcome technical determinism and belief that there are no alternatives. For me, the most dangerous motto or phrase, it's about that. There are no alternatives. This is a war that we can say and that we can believe. So there are alternatives that create small gaps in technological determinism, enabling us to envisage other technological or non-technological present and futures. And I think it's our responsibility, beyond the necessary criticism, to be forward-looking and to pay equal attention to the possible potentialities of what Anat Singh, another anthropologist, calls the latent commons. So they are here, they are just waiting to emerge at another scale. And so, yes, all of this work is related with this idea of social justice and political justice that is coined by Eric Kolinjivadi and others, that people affected by a decision must be able to take part in it. And I see that in some of the maker spaces I study, there is some type of democratic experimentation and the power to act and to put the technology as the right place for people, and to think about where we want to see the technology and this use in our society.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandrine. Vijay, I feel like obviously you don't exclusively work in tech project, but I'm anticipating that everything that's been raised and just now with the idea that there's no alternative, that, for example, sustainability should look this way, right? We're going to have green finance, we're going to have smart agriculture, right? And that's what we promote as it's the way. But I feel like from all your different experience in teaching, in your research, as well as an activist, you're in touch with many more of those more grassroots movements that teach us that there are plural ways of looking ahead and that are actually much more promising in developing sustainable, equitable futures. From all this experience that you have, what could you bring us to think in the tech context, but not, I mean, we can make that link obviously, but to get inspiration from, to establish trust, to build lasting relations, to be able to build true social power, we could say, to reimagine the future.
Yeah, I think the word innovation says there's a lot there in that word. Innovation can be a really great thing, and it is a very great thing when it is delinked and removed from markets. Basically, we have to take innovation off of the speculative market. We have to take that idea in our head where it's how can this be sold? How can we? I think when that happens, then we can actually think about how innovation can be about reciprocity, mutual aid, and support. And also we can go back to what it is. The point of innovation is to be used. We want to create. It's what you talked about, Sandrine. The makers to be able to produce, to use things. I think we've gotten we're confused. I mean, confused with, so ecological economists, I'll say, will argue that we are so confused with the ideas of exchange value that we forgot about use value. We forgot about the basic things people have not yet met their basic needs. And so innovation to meet people's needs is a climate solution. You know, housing, affordable housing, food accessibility, being able to ensure food security through technological improvement. And one example is things like tissue culture, you know, where you can actually you can use technology to actually determine how to provide more improved cultivars that are linked with relationships to the territory, with the land, with the history, that, you know, build on agroforestry techniques and things like that, but also expand and allow for food production to be, you know, for use locally and for exchange locally, and are not, you know, sold and commodified. So taking things off market is really one key thing. Like building technology that does not get embedded in markets is key. And I think for that we have to be more creative and subversive. That's part of the innovation there. We have to figure out how we can sell things, you know, or promote things as being, you know, good for the economy, but actually they are good for the economy, the real economy of people meeting their needs. But you kind of, if we live in a society of spectacle, of constant performance, we have to get better at being able to perform that we are, you know, playing along with this system, but while we're actually producing exactly what you say, commons, you know, being innovative for the commons. So we need to think about we need to be more creative. The answer lies in the word innovation, I think. And also, I think, just to say, I think, Christoph, you've talked about convivial technology and how that is so linked with degrowth, and why, you know, that's essentially what degrowth is. I mean, in addition to large-scale dematerialization. But it's also what makes technology convivial is having the capacity to decide if we even want it or not. To have the democratic spaces where we can discuss if we want something. Oftentimes we're not even having that space. We just immediately, it is arrived, what is this new thing? What's this new word? What's this new? Where did it come from? Where do these things come from? We don't have those spaces to actually deliberate. And so that has to be prioritized. We have to take those spaces, and social movements that are able to take those deliberative spaces back to say, hey, well, we want first to discuss it is going to be key. One thing very clear, and I think it came up in the last panel, was going offline. Social movements, you know, we have to use technologies. We use technologies to help us coordinate, but we don't reveal all of our tactics and how we are organizing on them. That is not. It's just not smart, let's say. So. I know that the word, we talk of smart cities and smart technologies, but clearly we have to outsmart the smart technologies. And here I think about the Indian farmers movement that mobilized from 2020 until 2022 almost, to basically to repeal India's farm laws, which were going to be very oppressive to the vast majority of small-scale farmers. And when they mobilized and were sitting outside of the checkpoint areas outside of Delhi, they didn't rely on social media. They produced their own written pamphlets and materials about what was happening with the protest, what the movement, with making their in negotiating and being able to make their claims. And this, in a way, prevented disinformation that was very rampant online, and became, you know, a very easy way to create these spaces of disinformation. So just being able to have interactions face to face, translated into multiple languages that are relevant for people, has a huge role to play in actually, being able to connect with people to build these movements. And we can use certain technologies to coordinate each other to do this, but we don't reveal all this information there, you know? When I think about the pandemic here in Montreal, when I was involved in mutual aid support, being able to translate the health material into in this case South Asian languages, going to the neighborhood of Parc Extension, and being able to go door to door to share this information, it was so much more, powerful in a way for people to see, oh, this is what I have to do, because the state was absent. There was no state. It was unable to meet the needs of in this case allophone population. So that's where that face-to-face interaction had a very, very strong role. There are, I think, two more things I thought of saying. One is building coalitions across class. One is, when people feel there is this elitism around, sort of techno-elitism, I think there's opportunity to play with that. There is techno-elitism, and that when all this technology is being used for the speculative market and for creating more investment, and just for the sake of that investment, then and for long-termist visions, which are so dangerous, that is a kind of techno-elitism. And so we that's where people's day-to-day experiences of inflation, of unaffordability of living, spans across your political spectrum, whether you come from the right or the left. We can create new forms of coalition based on this lived reality. So I think that's also something that's worth exploring. And the last thing was about this data poisoning that Blair had mentioned. It was just something I think that is really important. We have to become more clever at those kinds of tools and techniques to use the system against it, let's say. So I'll leave it there.
Great. Christoph, I'll give you the chance to say perhaps one more thing or a few more things before opening up to discussion with everyone else here and online, as we have about half an hour left. But talking about the coalitions to build and alternative ways of engaging with technology, sometimes with, sometimes without, sometimes with, in order to sort of redirect the initial means. Could you give us an overview of the different movements? You mentioned, obviously, you're part of some communities that try to push the field towards degrowth or towards innovation without growth. I know there's a few and quite a bit of scholars here in the room, and I don't know to what extent those communities are visible. Could you give us an overview of the different movements within computing that work on technology otherwise, and what they look like, what they're working on, and perhaps what's missing, if you want to go that far?
Yeah, so I think there is much more than I can list quickly, and so I think it would be quite preposterous to kind of claim that I can give you a comprehensive list. So I want to apologize to all who I leave out here. And you mentioned in your prompt to me by email kind of this idea of towards other economic paradigms. So I made a brief list that is a bit shaped by that. But there is more than you might think. And so on the one hand, for a long time within some fields in computing, like human-computer interaction and participatory design, there has been a very healthy stream of alternative heterodox work, critical intersectional feminist work, anti-colonial work, work considering the political economy of computing. And so within that space, you find influences from data feminism, from design justice, from environmental justice, from data justice, shaping existing research in human-computer interaction. And so these are often not very explicitly directed towards alternative economic paradigms such as degrowth, but a lot of the work is very relevant for it, whether that's developing feminist notions of care in technology, or it speaks about peer production. And you'll also find influence of development critique and pluriversal design perspectives. And then a few years ago, out of a series of workshops that I helped organize at places like the Participatory Design Conference, we did found the Tech Otherwise platform. I can put a link in the chat. And among other things, we released a report titled Defund Big Tech, Refund Community that may resonate with the audience, I guess. And we're aiming to develop that into a more consistent place for visions of technologies otherwise. So contributions, ideas, proposals are very welcome. And there is, of course, then there is a movement towards platform cooperatives and other tech cooperatives, and not a lot of that is maybe taking place within computing research so far, I might say, but it has certainly become a topic, as have other concepts like solidarity economies. What has become a bit more explicitly articulated in human-computer interaction more recently is the framework of post-growth and its relevance for computing, kind of asking how a recognition of this paradigm shift shifts the work in design of technology. And we're organizing a workshop this year at the HCI conference CHI, and there was a workshop last year, and there was the interest in this is clearly growing as well. I just sometimes find that what is maybe a little bit missing in the post-growth conversation there is that it sometimes avoids the structural engagement with capitalist growth imperatives, which are, I believe, necessary. And so degrowth, for example, does that, of course, but it doesn't speak very detailed so far to computing or technology, and that is a conversation that I think is overdue and which I hope to foster this year. And I think maybe two other things to really mention is that the spaces that wonderful people at places like the Distributed AI Research Institute create, both if you want to look at the Possible Futures blog, or there's an upcoming event in 2 weeks that looks fantastic. These might not be explicit articulations about degrowth so specifically or alternative economic structures, but they speak very meaningfully to this, and especially speak very much to this need to envision and imagine technologies otherwise. And then finally, the one academic community where I believe a lot of the exciting conversations have been happening, and where we have very explicitly kind of opened and shaped the conversation along these lines, including some existing papers on degrowth, for example, and pluriversal design, is the Computing Within Limits conference series that is very explicitly framed around the recognition of planetary boundaries and very openly across and transdisciplinary. And the call for papers for this year is open until late April. And so I'd encourage you all to have a look. Perspectives around across disciplines are very, very welcome.
Thank you, Christoph. Many, many thanks to the three of you. I think we can applaud our wonderful speakers for today and open up the conversation to you all here, but online as well. Take questions if you have, or comments.
Yes, excuse me, sorry. If anyone has any questions, you can, online, you can put them into the chat. We'll do our best to read them out. Those of you in the space, just raise your hand, we can bring a microphone over. Okay, we got one.
Thanks for the great discussion. I hear about ways to counter the current capitalist system and the tech within it. And my problem is that it's hard to imagine. It's hard to it's hard to believe that it can be real, that it can become a reality, that it can be true. I think there's a strong narrative that is present in all sorts of media, in art, in film, in books, of progress as a great thing. It's a return of the type of belief in progress that we saw at the turn of the 20th century. Now we see it with the long-termism. And whether people believe it or not, they want to believe it because it's a nice story and it's a nice narrative. How do we get people to get out of this, to see the alternative? You said that's the problem, there's no alternative, that's what's presented to us. How do we get people out of the mind frame of the sort of the regular way of thinking that we have? They know something is wrong, they feel it, I think we all feel it, but they don't see a true believable alternative, one that has a nice narrative to it and that they can imagine, see in art, etc. How do we approach that?
Yeah, I think it is very difficult. It is extremely difficult to approach that and to get people to see, to imagine alternatives in this climate. I think one very small thing, and it was raised earlier, but is creating communities of practice around refusal. being able to say, collectively organizing, getting to know the people who live around you or who we work with and say, I don't understand why this technology, why this app is now being used, or why this software is now, we're told we have to use this. It's about, coming and saying, building collective power and saying we don't want to use this, and here's why. Being able to explain, do the research and follow up and understand where those things may not be working for everyone. They may not be. I think that's one small thing. There are many other little things. There are many things you can do from the things we've talked about, including hacking them and this and that. But first, there has to be, in order to get, I think, people to feel there is some hope, is there has to be some kind of inspiration that comes out of collective organizing around refusal. Being able to know that, hey, these guys are able to say that they don't want this, or they want something different, and they're able to have a space to discuss that. That makes a world of difference in this kind of climate.
I would maybe add, if I may, that I think refusal is important, but it's true that we also need to actively envision and facilitate the envisioning of what else, the alternative, the otherwise. And I think I posted a couple of links for work that I find really inspiring out of the transition movement, for example, and transition design and some of the degrowth work that is quite inspiring in that sense, kind of showing the tangible visions. But it is also about shattering the illusion that there is a monolithic structure that is all one. And I think so. I'm thinking of one of the very, very small moves that we can do to recognize that we're already in a world that is fragmented and pluralist. And there is already other things as well in our lives. Not everything is uniform capitalism top to bottom. And I think that recognizing that in anyone's lives, there is already a lot that is interstitial, so to say, is one helpful step. And concretely envisioning alternatives through things like transition design exercises or otherwise kind of speculative design and so on, is a very helpful way to realize that things don't have to be as they are, that we can decide to rearrange things. And I think maybe finally I think one thing that I've felt changes the mood in these kinds of conversations is recognizing that real alternatives already exist. And that real cooperatives, for example, already exist and are flourishing in various places, including Barcelona. And that there are already communities that organize differently, that have convivial tech, that design, that make, that do, that innovate, recognizing that this is already happening, just not maybe here in this room right now so much. That kind of moment of recognition I felt often kind of leads to a difference in outlook and the kind of the ability to begin to envision.
If I can add something, I very agree with you too, but especially about what you mentioned, Vijay, about community of practice. I think this is very, very important, and this is exactly what happened in the makerspace. And this is because there is a physical space for discussion and to do stuff, to do things together. And I think it's really a game changer to have this type of space to do things together and to critically reflective, but also to imagine other use and finalities of this technology. What is the right place that we want to give to them? Is it useful? It is not useful. And even if it was designed for this type of use, can we imagine another type of use of this machine or technology? So this is a very important point. Another point that I can mention too, this is to put technology out of the market, of course. And I still wonder why it's not the case, because we are not treating technology as education or health. And I think it could be exactly the same regime or analyzing, or and we could be able to discuss that, and we could be able to maybe to vote for people representing us. I'm more into direct democracy or citizen participation, direct participation. But for me, it's that's why I was saying that we need to politicize the technology, but from the bottom. It's because we need to be able to put technology like another field, like education. It's not a market, it's something that could benefit for everybody if you want to. And also, I find it's maybe contradictory because I study a lot of techno-utopianism critically as well. But I can also find in some speculative fiction some very great ideas or that can be discussed, not to take it for real or for a good solution, because it's another solutionism. But in speculative fiction, for example, in the Ministry of Future, Kim Robinson, it's not perfect, but I think some discussion group about this type of books could produce something interesting to feed some new ideas about that, what we want, and I think this is very powerful to do this. But it's community, physicality to restore conviviality, to quote Illich.
Do we have any other questions in the space?
Hi, thank you for this great conversation. I'm curious if any of you have any examples. We talked about building coalitions across class, for example. Any examples of how to bring validity to lived experience? Because I think that can be a really, I guess, we're talking about community organizing, community building, and coalition building, and I think lived experience is often not viewed as valid in terms of expertise, but it's essential to, I think, building some of these tools and technologies in a more responsible way. So have you seen examples of how folks are either trying to bring more validity to lived experience and incorporating that in some of these conversations?
Christoph, do you want to go?
Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure. I can. So that kind of shapes some of our current projects at my research group, actually, where we look at the relationships between data science ways of knowing, especially as often kind of expressed through map-based data visualizations of kind of large-scale, highly processed data sets that visualize how a city is doing, for example, on maps. And how that relates to community knowledge, experienced knowledge, situated knowledges that come out from community advocates, for example, who know exactly what is going on and can also see how that is misrepresented on such systems, and to bring these two things in dialogue. I think in general, for example, a lot of the work that is inspired by design justice does a really great job in kind of centering lived experience, centering those who are most affected, based on the principle that we should center the voices of those who are most directly impacted and who are most affected and marginalized by technology design, and really taking that seriously and placing that at the center of technology design. There's wonderful projects to look at, so kind of I've often said that when I have to choose between a project that very centrally says sustainable tech or IT for sustainability or green computing to address the sustainability question, and the project that is based on, for example, design justice principles, I believe that the design justice principles will lead to much more much more sustainable and just technology typically, because it reconfigures the roles of participation, the role of expertise, the role of power, and sets them on a much more just ecological foundation and perspective, sidestepping solutionism, sidestepping techno-utopianism, a very, very kind of generative space and orientation to work with.
Yeah, I think building these kinds of coalitions across class. I think about like the academy as being the research that we do is, I mean, the academy itself. What we argue in the sustainability class, we are part of the sustainability class, very much so. We are very, very. We're not. We are not the working class in that sense. So what can we do to be supporting struggles of the working class? And that's where research analytics, that's where like certain technologies that we can use to support struggles and movements directly through the resources that we have here. So being able to use the resources that we have here and spend them, spend them for the movements. And I think that is that there's a significant role that should actually be what we do in the university, is to find ways to, because then we are producing knowledge collectively through movements that are resulting in transformative change, that are, structural change of the kind that we want to see. I was going to give some examples of, actually, last week I had heard a talk about how researchers were supporting the port, those who work in the port, workers who are striking against their working conditions. So being able to show striking specifically for Palestine. And so they were in support of Palestinians. They didn't want weapons to be sent there. So researchers are doing the analytical work to be able to show where are these ships going, how does that directly affect your working conditions? Where is the links being made between a genocide that is happening in the world and and the working conditions you're experiencing? What role do we play then as academics to be able to support that kind of bringing together of knowledge? That is an example of using technology in that way.
Do you want to add anything, or if I may, take the privilege of having a microphone already? But when we think about technology as like obviously not a neutral thing that's isolated, and how it embodies a vision, and how we should have collective spaces where we discuss what type of technological layer we want, I think it brings back that question of all of a sudden you're not in a expertise from knowledge as understood as only coming from experts that have been trained in the field, but just ultimately much more normative questions of what type of society do we want and where do we want certain things. And I think you start to see those things in different fields outside of tech as well. In the transition movement, for example, here in Montreal, I'm part of a project at University of Montreal called Transition Pathways, Chemin de Transition. And it's not the only one, obviously, but it's one of the ones that I know most. But there's that view of, transition or ecological sustainability transitions are not a sort of engineered management project that should be happening in a box, right? It's ultimately comes down to a lot of collective discussions that we should have. And then once you start from that principle, well, you can't just study how we should transition and what is the optimized way of moving to sustainable society, right? You need to engage in discussions. And I think that's this sort of shift in thinking about those issues help bring a more equal view and a less, perhaps hierarchized view of knowledge that we've had traditionally in a lot of academic spheres. We have a bit of time for maybe 2 more questions, if they are.
Once again, just a reminder to those on Zoom, if you had any questions, you can just pop them into the chat and we'll read them out. Any other questions in the space?
We get to end it here then. we don't have to run until 5. It's 4:54. Thank you all so much for coming here today. The fourth space will be still open for another hour, so you're more than welcome to hang around, chat, network. Will be I think all the panelists can stay a little bit longer if you have extra questions or if you wanted to engage in some further discussions. We'll definitely be happy to do so. So thank you so much for coming here today, and happy to keep the conversations rolling. Thank you. Thank you. Many thanks,
Martin,
Christoph.
thank you. Thank you, Christoph. Thank you to our panelists and, of course, to everyone here. And thank you for your questions. Just want to let you know that we'll be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now. But both of these conversations remain available on our YouTube channel. You should revisit it and share it there. And you should also have a fantastic weekend. Okay.